Okay, we are recording. This is Building Resilient Families. And so let us begin. Here is my presentation. So one moment. Here we go. So how do we do this? We all need to want to build resilient families now, of course, since things have changed so much. But even before, we have been teaching this workshop. And so here's a quick overview of what we will talk about today. So we'll talk about why resilience, why do we need that? And in that, I will also give you a bit more of an understanding of what trauma looks like, where trauma comes from. And then in that respect, we'll talk about resilience. Then we'll talk about what are some resiliency skills that you might already have that you can continue to sharpen and that you can also help your children really develop. And then we'll talk about supporting social and emotional development in children. And then we'll hopefully be able to touch upon some resources and networks that support families. And what, in my experience, a lot of times there is great wisdom in the participants coming together and sharing some of these resources. So I hope that you all will be open to sharing some of those as well. I want to say too that if you have any questions, you're welcome to unmute yourself and ask anytime, even when I am in the presentation or when you need to clarify something. But in the meantime, I think there's also a chat button and a raising your hand button. So you can use those and, hopefully you'll be able to just communicate in that way and reach out if you need anything. Okay. So let us start with this sort of heavy topic. We do some exercises, at first where we talk about, so just some little introductions, but I hope that, you all know, we have a broad range of ages that we're parenting, from really little, from toddlers all the way to already almost full grown adults in terms of their, close to 21, I think it was. And yes, so I want to really make this relevant for all these ages, and therefore, we'll feel free to ask any questions, or we will see that we can translate what we talk about onto this. So what you see here in front of you is an overview of a study that was done at almost 20 years ago, actually 21 years ago. It was called the Adverse Childhood Experience Study. And so for those of you who already know about it, forgive me for repeating, but this is some really useful puzzle piece in order to really get a bigger picture of the impact of trauma on our health and well-being. So what this study showed, it basically by accident, really, a doctor in an obesity prevention program had come across or accidentally asked a question to one of the patients that revealed that the patient was sexually abused when she was a child. And because he had heard similar stories from other patients just a few days ago, it made him curious. And so he went on to do a little bit more research and then found that there were other smaller studies and basically research projects that indicated that when children have specific experience that are adverse experiences like sexual abuse in childhood, there are greater risks for their long-term health and well-being. And so this Dr. Felitti and Dr. Anda at the Centers for Disease Control went together and did a really one of the largest studies that was ever conducted in the United States, the Adverse Childhood Experience Study. And what they found out is basically that if children experience, as they're growing up or by the age they had reached 18, if they had experienced abuse, so that means emotional, physical, or sexual abuse, or they were witnessing difficult things like domestic violence, or they had a caregiver who was struggling with a substance abuse disorder, or who had a mental illness like a depression, or if the children, or there was parental separation or divorce, or if one of the parents was incarcerated. And then also if they had been, neglected emotionally, that they didn't feel loved, or they weren't taken care of physically in the sense that they had experienced, for example, poverty, and so didn't know really where their dinners were coming from. So those experiences, if they were adding up, showed that if folks had 4 or more of these experiences, so say the parents, the child witnessed domestic violence, and maybe the one of the parents was an alcoholic, and the other parent struggled with mental illness or a depression as a result of what was going on, and also if that led to parental separation, and in this whole process the child didn't really feel loved, the risk for heart disease went up 3 times. The risk for stroke went up, I think, also 4 times, which is not listed here. Also, the level of, or the risk for doing drugs went up 11 times. The risk for suicide increased 14 times. And then the risk for, other mental illness like depression and so forth, and other illnesses really went up in tremendously, and so did other risky behaviors. So, in other words, the more of these experiences we have in childhood, the higher the risk that our health and our well-being is affected. And so, what they also found is that if an individual experienced 6 or more of these adversities, as adults, on average, they lived 20 years less. So they had a 20-year lower life expectancy. So that said, this study was really groundbreaking because it really helped make that connection. We oftentimes say, oh, little children, they don't remember. Or adults might say, I turned out fine. It's like you got over it. And also, even when we do get over those experiences and we demonstrate a great deal of resilience, there is still a higher chance that if we're not acknowledging these potential risks, then our physiology may be affected. So all that said, it doesn't mean that we're doomed. I'm just going to, now I'll leave this on. So it doesn't mean that we're doomed. However, it really means that we need to look at what are the factors in our lives that can help prevent the impact of the trauma on children in particular, but also what are the factors that, like protective factors, that we can build into our social circle so that we can help prevent these adversities from occurring in the first place. And so this is really where the topic of resilience comes in, right? So this is where we want to talk about, so how can we be able to help prevent this and address this? And I want to give you an example, or kind of explain to you, and I'm taking this off for a moment. I want to explain to you the reason why there is an impact on our health, and how also basically stressful situations really take place in our bodies. So if you imagine that your brain is a hand, and I'm just taking my hand as a model, go figure. So I'm no, of course, neurologist, but this is fairly, I think, simple and really interesting information that can definitely help us, especially as we're parenting. So if this is our brain, and this part here on the bottom of my palm represents the survival part of the brain. This is the part of the brain that is responsible for our breathing, our heartbeat, blood pressure, body temperature, basically all the functions that keep us alive. This is where that is housed. And this is the only part of the brain that is fully functioning when we're born. So the next part of the brain is here, this middle part of the brain, which is my thumb, and that is what is called the limbic part of the brain, where the emotions are housed. And this part is connected to the survival part of the brain through what we can call a smoke detector, or what is also known as the amygdala, which basically is a small gland that houses hormones like cortisol and adrenaline. And I'll get to that in just a moment. And then this part of the brain here is the so-called higher part of the brain is the the cortex, the frontal lobes or the neocortex. And this is where our rational thinking, decision making, learning, and all that is housed. So our brain, when it's fully online, which means, when we are feeling relaxed and, open, hopefully you all feel something similar right now. You are learning, you are listening rather. This is basically how our brain looks.
Just a question, and that's considering that we are only using 10% of the brain.
Yes.
As they say.
Right, as they say, even though I think that some of that has already been defeated, I think there are other ideas about how much percentage of the brain we actually access. Yeah, but that's based on the fact these very simple functions. And just to say, of course, there are lots of different parts of the brain that are broken down, that have all very different and complicated names and different functions. But this is basically what we're looking at. So what happens is that, and by the way, the brain is not fully developed until the age of about 25 or 30. So while even, a 4-year-old can think, of course, the neurological pathways that kind of wires all of this together and basically helps with the self-regulation of the brain, and I'll get into that in just a moment, doesn't really fully develop until, 25 or 30. That's when everything is very solid. And I could tell you a whole lot more about that process, but today I really want to give you just what happens is that, so let's say, we're going in the woods and for a walk, and I'm giving you this example just to show you how the brain works. So we're going for a walk in the woods, and all of a sudden we see a bear. What happens when you see a bear while you're walking?
Get scared.
You get very scared. That's absolutely right. So you're scared. And so what that means is that your feeling part of the brain is activated. And so as this feeling part is activated, it means that blood flow now has to go into the middle part of the brain, the emotional part of the brain, so that there is, basically this is what what stimulates that activity. And because that feeling is really intense, what it does is basically it sort of wakes up, so this is the limbic part of the brain. This part is becoming deactivated or lesser activated, because if you're now standing there and you are debating with yourself, I wonder what it was. Should you sing happy birthday or clap your hands? I can't quite remember. You might lose some really valuable time. So your higher part of the brain, the thinking and the decision making part, basically gets turned off. The blood flows into the middle part of the brain. And because now there is more activity, the amygdala, the smoke detector, says, wait a minute, is there something happening here? Wait, are we at risk? Oh my God, we could die. And so now, the lid is totally flipped, and the survival part of the brain can take over and is basically pumping extra blood into your arms and into your legs so you can run faster or you can defend yourself, whatever you need to do.
Well, I already encountered 2 times a bear, and what I did, I yelled at the bear, and he ran away.
I always wonder about this because I'm worried when I go for walks. This is one of the things that scares me. So I'm glad that that works for you. I hope my survival part of the brain will remember that, should that happen to me. So and basically, so what happens is, now that we're in the survival mode, right, is after the bear goes away, we feel okay, now things are all right. We can now basically calm our feelings down. Our feelings become less intense. And now you can start thinking about, it's like, whoa, what happened? That was crazy. And then you can analyze, did I do the right thing? Should I have gone this way? Or, whatever. And so that's a normal situation that helps keep us alive. But what also happens is that basically, so what happens when we experience trauma and those, what I just explained, these adversities in childhood, what happens is that basically also our feelings get really big. So say you're witnessing your parents having a really bad fight, or objects are smashing while you're trying to sleep, or you feel that, no one in my family cares about me. Those trigger really big feelings. And that means basically that the lid is constantly flipped ever so slightly, and sometimes even a lot. And that means, again, that the survival part of the brain is kind of overstimulated. And therefore, maybe the part that develops more. So we're developing reactivity. And so this is why it's important to talk about this experience. I want to add that in this study, the Adverse Childhood Experience study, they did not look at external factors such as, experiencing bullying, or experiencing racism, or experiencing violence outside of your home. And even though that was not included in those 10 questions they asked, it is absolutely also affecting our, our stress levels. So I could tell you a lot more about this, but we really want to talk about resilience. And so therefore, what I'm trying to get at is that, first of all, resilience, or developing resilience, doesn't just take place in ourselves. It takes a broader circle. And this is why we talk about building resilient families, because family units can really help with this. And I also want to say that, so you're not necessarily doomed when you've had these experiences, but you are able to basically learn our own responses. And so translating all of that a little bit into today, into what is going on in our world at this moment, with the pandemic alone, we are experiencing higher stress levels than normal. I don't know about you all. I definitely, even though I might have less time that I need to spend traveling, but the situation is different, and there's a lot of uncertainty around us, and not being able to predict the future into some sort of safety really increases our stress levels automatically. And so we want to prevent the impact of stress on our children's health and well-being in the long term. And this is why it's really awesome to know what tools there are that we can use in order to help us mitigate some of these responses that may, otherwise occur. So I want to pause for a moment and ask, do you have any questions for me at this point?
No, so far, I think it's okay.
Okay, awesome. Great. Yes. So no questions. Thank you too. Okay, so I'm going to go back to my presentation. Okay, so now we know that there are also some protective factors. So the National Alliance of Children's Trust and Prevention Fund basically developed this so-called protective factor framework. And what they have done is they have identified 5 factors. There's no specific order, it's just how they're listed. They have developed 5 factors that we know can help mitigate and prevent, but help basically can buffer stress for our children and help reduce the stress levels in that sense, so that we're able to always make sense of it. Remember, when your brain goes basically offline, it becomes hard to make sense of our environment, of our situation, of whatever is going on, because the thinking part of the brain is not accessible at this point, right? And in order to solve problems and in order to explain to ourselves what happens, in order to have a vision as to how we can solve problems, we need to have the brain online. And that's why we talk about this, ability or this need for stress reduction. Okay, so the first factor is what we call parental resilience. So parental resilience is really referred to as our ability to respond to difficult situations. And I just have to check my presentation for 1 second. Okay, we'll talk about this in wrong way, sorry. No. Here we go. No, I am so sorry. I don't know what happened. Here we were. Okay, so the second factor, and we will go into a little bit more depth as in, throughout this class today. So the second factor is social connections. And so that, and I will talk a little bit more about that too. And then the third one is having concrete support in times of need. So knowing that, let's say your car breaks down in the middle of the night and you know who you can call. It could be someone you don't know, like AAA, or maybe your cell phone carrier has some kind of a roadside service, it's called, or whatever your insurance might. So, but knowing that really basically helps reduce your stress level, because that you can get out of the situation. The fourth one is supporting social and emotional development in children, and we'll talk about that too. And then parenting knowledge, that's also a big one. So we won't talk about that too much today, but really just to say that when we know why our children behave the way they do, it makes it a lot easier to respond to them, or quote unquote deal with their difficult behaviors, right? So when we have more knowledge about what is appropriate to expect from a child, then we are able to really help them troubleshoot more. So, okay, so let's look at this resilience piece. So parental resilience, that's a big one. So what is resilience? When you hear the word resilience, what comes to mind for you?
The ability to bounce back.
Yes,
Mhm.
absolutely. The ability to bounce back. Yeah, what else comes to mind?
The ability to rely on yourself.
To rely on yourself. Yeah, knowing you're going to be there for yourself. Yeah. What else?
Yeah, you can say.
Yeah, like an elastic band, how it can snap back.
Elastic band. Yeah. So the word actually comes from the word resiliere, which is in a Latin word that means to bounce back, exactly that, to recoil. And so that's how resilience is oftentimes viewed, right? So that we're like, we have this thing, you experience something, stretch, and then you can come back. Or you have a really difficult situation, and when things are okay, I'm back. So the trouble with that definition or that understanding is that it sort of relies on an old normal to be able to be reassumed, right? But what we oftentimes find, and this is what the interesting part is really about, so much of the research around resilience and much of it done around from that we know from disaster recovery, is that when we are experiencing an adversity, we rarely ever are able to go back to that old normal, because oftentimes that changed. And I think this is exactly what makes it so tricky even right now, because we just want to get back to normal. you know, with this pandemic. We just want to come back. And yet we know that, you know, we have this inclination that things will be different going forward, even if we don't know what, but things have changed. You know, same thing if you, let's say you lose a loved one, you know, that your life is never the same, even though you might go back to your same house and you have your same job or your same, you know, you do the same things. Your life is just never the same. And so this is important to recognize, because really what we are looking at here when we talk about resilience in this context is we're talking about the ability to adapt to change, right? How are we able to adapt to these new situations and the unknown? And that's what we want to look at. So this means that there has to be some sort of an embrace, even if it's very discomforting and, you know, sometimes heartbreaking. There has to be some kind of embrace of that change, right? Some kind of acceptance. Okay. So yeah, so what does resilience look like? What does that look like for you when you think about it? What comes to mind for you?
I mean, I was looking in the terms of materials when you stretch a material and there is a plastic recovery. And if it's too much, then the material will be plastic deformed. So it will not come back to the same point where we started. So this is an analogy to what you were saying. The environment has changed. I mean,
Right.
I've seen this happening in the last months of my life. My brother passed away, left 2 kids. He also experienced a divorce in his family, he and his wife. So I'm looking at my nephews going through all this situation. They are both small kids, you know, so they are scarred for life. Their life is completely changed. Now on top of this, we have COVID, so they cannot go to the school. They don't have the social support. Same thing happens here with us, you know. So I experienced when my wife, she was deployed in Afghanistan. I lost 3 family members on the same year, one after the other.
Hmm.
You know, and then it was me trying to support my daughter, and mommy wasn't there, you know.
Mhm.
And now these years, also this thing happened, so it's kind of the same situation going on, you
But
know.
the
So that
resilience,
creates a lot of stress, of course, creates emotional disturbance. I mean, and sometimes it's not well dealt, and we pass that subconscious to the kids, you know.
Mhm. Yeah, no, I mean, first of all, really sorry for your loss. That's a lot for your bigger family there. And absolutely. So, and it looks like, you know, you are, so one of the things you're doing is, I don't know if this is in this context, but you know, you all are here in this class. So you took a step to think about, you know, you're open to learning tools or, you know, being reminded or, you know, connecting with others in order to, you know, keep your mind open. And so that's one of the factors that I would say is definitely, you know, an aspect of what resilience looks like, right? Is so that you continue to seek out resources and connections and so forth. Yeah, and so I want to say that a lot of times, right, we live in this culture that very much thinks that, you know, you pull yourself up by your bootstraps. But, you know, first of all, a lot of kids don't have bootstraps yet. And secondly, you know, there really is, it's not just that you can do this yourself. Resilience is not a do it yourself project. It really takes a village at that. It takes that, you know, bringing us together and looking at that. So, so that's absolutely what, you know, what we, yeah, that's kind of it. Anyone else want to say something, or I'll move? Okay. So why resilience is so important, I think we just talked about this. The fact that, you know, it really means that we help reduce the stress or the impact of the stress. And also we should say that when we talk about being resilient, it doesn't mean to go back to like a positive attitude. I can do this. Everything is okay. You know, when there's loss, it requires that we grieve. When there are things happening, it really is important that we recognize all of that is going on and not push it under the rug or expect ourselves to be fully functioning. It also sometimes means really responding to our own needs. What is it that what we need to do, right? So I follow this on this person on Instagram. It's called the Nap Ministry. And I really love the whole concept of, you know, rest is what we need to do in order to be able to bounce back or in order to be able to tackle the world. And so rest is oftentimes really highly underestimated. Yeah. Okay, so some of the steps to developing resilience is what we just talked about, right? Is really acknowledging the situation and then, you know, beginning to respond to the needs that are arising from that. And the other part that can really help is life stories. So what we call sometimes vicarious resilience. So if we're able to basically, first of all, develop stories around what we're experiencing. So you all might have heard, you know, I think Mr. Rogers' quote that says, look for the helpers in a disaster, look for the helpers. So, you know, when we look at the things that are happening to make things move on or to respond to some kind of a disaster or an adversity, then we are also looking at the stories of all the ways that we might come together and that things might be addressed. And so what that does is it helps us create a different narrative as opposed to just focusing on the trauma in that sense. So in these life stories, also what we build in sometimes is our family stories. What are our family stories in terms of, you know, what maybe our grandparents have been able to survive? You know, maybe our grandparents were immigrants or migrants. Maybe, you know, they came from the South to the North in the hopes for a safer life. Maybe they traveled from, you know, you mentioned Portugal or you know, thinking about my family, you know, having to move from Latvia to Germany, right? So those are all stories that we can build in. And if we know these and we know about how our, you know, ancestors, so to speak, were able to respond to some of the adversities and the challenges they experienced in life, it also helps enrich us, right? Okay, so let's look at this a little bit more practical. We defined it already, sorry. So what does it look like in our everyday life? What are some factors, some things that you can do basically to help reduce your stress levels? I'm going to share here. I'm going to stop this share for a second just to turn us on. If you want, you can put your cameras on otherwise. So what are some of the things you can do to help reduce your stress, or what are you already doing?
Meditation or exercise?
Yeah, exercise and meditation, you said also. And it looks
Talking,
like, yeah, and
talking to
Joseph
each
was
other.
going to say the same thing, exercise.
No, you're saying,
Sorry, Joseph, go ahead.
Yeah, just sometimes you forget to just step back and take a deep breath and keep things in perspective, right? You need to just, sometimes I use numbers, right? I've learned this trick of use numbers that are not consecutive, say those numbers and then say consecutive numbers just to breathe, take a step back.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you. Absolutely. And
Yeah,
you actually take a step back. I have a funny exercise later in the slideshow that kind of highlights that. Yeah, you were going to say something.
no, it was funny because my mother told me the same thing, just to think, the count and breathe and wait to relax and take all the negative energy that we accumulate. And, you know, that's what's the stress. And I have a lot of that. Yeah.
I have the new Apple Watch. It has a breathe feature. It'll throw reminders on there to just stop and take 1 minute to breathe. And it's super cool. Super
Yeah.
cool.
Absolutely. That's awesome. And exactly, because so breathing, right, what it does, it basically helps to reactivate or increase the blood flow in our bodies. And that helps bring the brain back online, right? So when we are in this really intense emotion and we breathe oxygen into our body, it can help basically get us back online. So absolutely, that's awesome. And the same thing with exercise. Once we've had like a rush of adrenaline and cortisol in our body, it needs to be gotten rid of, right? So doing some exercise is a really good way to do this. And even if it's just walking, it's physical movement to get things, the chemicals in our body mixed up. Absolutely. Any other things that you all do to reduce your stress?
Well, I like to do some yard work, so I can do the contact with the nature and try to, just be by myself and clear all my thoughts from the week of load, stress at work and stuff like that. And also it gives me an opportunity to shut down with the external communications like media and stuff like that. It's really so negative the last couple of months, and I think that's also putting a weight on everybody, a necessary weight.
Yeah,
Yes.
I
So
think, yeah,
spending time in nature is absolutely, that's there's something from Japan called forest bathing. So that means basically what it shows is that if we go into the forest or spend time in nature, it has almost the same impact as when we take certain medications to reduce our blood pressure. So there you go, figure. And then also what you mentioned, unplug. Absolutely. So my kids come to me now and they say, if I get snippy or irritated, they're like, Mom, I think it's time for you to unplug. And so it's awesome when you model these things to your kids, and you take actually a book, and you lie down and you read for a few minutes, even, absolutely. So yeah, and there's so much more we can do, of course, think about it as the basics. I want to always tell people, don't come up with this huge exercise routine or whatever. Think about really good sleep, um, some physical activity, and good eating habits, somehow. And that doesn't mean you have to have a perfect day every day, but eating things that really make us feel, that fuel us, that give us the energy we need. So some of these really basic things.
Mhm. And Yulika, laughter. I like to watch comedies. Yeah.
Yes, it's so good to laugh. Yes.
Hmm.
that's it.
Watching funny videos, absolutely. I have a video for you in a little bit. I hope it's going to
Okay.
make you laugh. Okay, great. Yes. All right, I'm going back to my slideshow. All right, so we looked at resilience, right? And so here are some additional factors. So everyday actions basically that can build resilience. First of all, valuing and supporting parents. So this is for those of you who might be supporting parents. And, oftentimes in our parenting classes, we say this, there's sometimes, people feel like they feel they're coming to a parenting class, or they are worried that I might work, that I might think that they are not good parents, or that we're trying to tell anyone how to parent. This is not what our parenting classes are about. Our parenting classes are really about adding tools to your toolboxes, right? Because we all can use more tools sometimes, and hey, our world comes up with new apps all the time. So we have some good and tried parenting tools, and then there are some new ones too as we learn more things. So valuing and supporting parents is huge. And you can do this as a parent yourself. How are you supporting yourself? If your child has ADHD, or is spending an extra amount of time on the screens during this pandemic, right? finding out ways that you can support yourself as a parent with either it's education or input from others, or just to have a friend to listen to, those are all factors that really make a big difference. We also want to really emphasize in this that honoring each family's culture and tradition is so important. And the more we do this, the more our children feel strengthened. So part of what I think is so difficult in our current climate is that, we're attacking each other for so many things. And also what's difficult for our young people is that they're seeing, they're exposed to more content online, and they think, they have to be a certain way in order to fit in or to say something. And so the more you know your family's culture and your traditions, and you know that it's celebrated and that it's valued, the more you also value yourself, because you really find that you are, you know that there's some intrinsic value in what you're doing, and it's not just about you, but there's a whole family culture behind it. Right? So traditions are really, really important and valuable. So also how we respond to family crisis, right? So when there's something going on, I read something beautiful today that said, it's really not so much about just how we respond to, or not fighting or not having, whatever situation. The key is how and that we make up again. Right? How do we repair our ruptures? So if your patience is a lot lower with each other, and this is not just the children, this is oftentimes our partners, right? It's our loved ones. Then, what effort are we putting in to making up again and to making amends? Are we willing to say, I'm sorry? Are we willing to really look at the problem and how we solve it, as opposed to who did what wrong, right? Are we willing to even ask the question, where did I go wrong? And am I willing to share that? So when, we are really spending time with that, that's what helps build that resilience in our family, because we know that we can, get through these difficult things. Yeah. And then, also for those of you who are working with families, building partnerships with parents that benefit everyone, right? So how can we build partnerships with parents? And as a parent, you can also build these with your children's teachers, right? Letting them know, my kid had a really rough day the last few days. I have no clue what's going on. I just want you to be aware. And, so the teacher can just have a little eye or say some extra words like, hey, I'm so glad to see you here, right? So being able to express this just helps us. And we oftentimes shy away from sharing personal stories with our children's teachers or the school. But really, and I know, some of you folks here are here from the school, and I can just underline this, and I know this from personal experience. I don't have to go into great detail, but even just sharing a little bit, really helps. So, an example, my kid didn't tell me that he was supposed to be in a Halloween costume this morning at 9:30 in his Google Meet. So he ended up being the only kid who wasn't in his Halloween costume. And, of course, he was really upset and mad. But, I sent his teacher a note just to say that, I'm sorry, I wasn't aware, we somehow dropped the ball with communication, and, so just, he was really upset about it. I'm not telling her, that she didn't tell me, or, it's his fault because he didn't tell me. I'm just saying. And so hopefully tomorrow she'll just say, hey, Lennox, it's great you came to school today, or whatever that might be. So it really helps to do that, communication. So here's our little exercise. So say you have a problem, right? Now I'll ask you all to do this with me. So your problem is in your hand, and now put it right in front of your eyes. How well are you, what else are you seeing behind your hands? other than your hand?
Not
Nothing.
much.
Not much, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, here, so see, this is what happens. So what happens if you move your hand a little bit away?
Then you can get the bigger picture.
Yes,
Yeah.
bigger picture. Oh, sorry. Now, see, I ruined my own
Presentation.
my own little thing. Yeah, so the idea is you get a bigger picture, right? So exactly what Joseph was saying, you know, that you sometimes you take a step back, and that's, you know, that's the thing. So it's this old Quaker exercise, apparently, whatever. I think it penetrated other areas too. So absolutely. Okay, thank you for that. So taking a step back, looking at the problem, that helps us solve it. Okay, so here are some so-called resilience building blocks. And so if I was in person with you, I would give you a little building block that had one of these names, but we don't have this. So I'm going to invite your imagination. And what you can see are these building blocks. So take action, gather resources, make positive choices, recognize challenges, acknowledge feelings or problem solve, communication skills, coping strategies, belief system, or hope. So
Mhm.
all of those are what we call resilience building blocks, as I just said. And so what I want you to do is an exercise here. I'm going to leave this off, and I want you to think about a problem that you had in the past. So it could be, you know, a really big challenge or a small challenge. I'll leave it up to you. And then I want you to say which of the building blocks you used first. So you could, these can be shuffled, right? All of these building blocks don't have a specific order. Any one of them is as valuable as the other. No one comes first or last. So think about which blocks did you use when you addressed the problem that you had. And I'm going to give you, you know, maybe a couple of minutes, and maybe you can write them down. And then we want to hear from a few folks of you of what you did. So I'm just going to be quiet for a moment and then let you respond.
Two ways, huh?
Okay. So now I am curious to hear from you. If you don't have to tell, you know, all details, you share with as much as you're comfortable, but tell us what sort of blocks did you use?
I can start.
Mhm.
Joe, without going into the details, I currently dealing with a particular situation where 3 blocks that immediately came out were hope, my belief system, and acknowledge my feelings.
Mm.
That was the first step in trying to get through a very tough time.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing. And then, you know, you can think about this, you know, take a screenshot and think about how you can add on other building blocks, you know, as you are going along. And as there's opportunity to apply them becomes available.
I have one. I was in Afghanistan. Pedro's in Atlanta with my daughter, and his father in Portugal passed away. Because of the time change, I found out first through his sister in Portugal. Because of the funeral being in a very short period of time, I'm a problem solver. So I did problem solve. I had to take action, bought his plane tickets. And by the time he woke up, these are your plane tickets. You need to take Sophia. You need to get on the plane. And of course, feeling acknowledgement. But it was something that had to happen within hours.
Yeah,
Wow.
I think to follow on that, it was like recognizing the challenge, look at the problem, solve, gather the resources, and then take action. You know, and it was a little bit what I said before, the three things that happened bad. So that year was my father, was my grandmother, and my grandfather. So it was like one after the other.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is absolutely amazing how you are able to show how you differently you respond to these different situations, right? So, and it shows that these building blocks are really different for different people and for different situations, and you know, however you are going to apply them. So I am just going to check something. Okay. Thank you. Would anyone else like to share?
Sure, I'll chime in. Back in '07, I had a lot of loss myself, so I could certainly identify with the feelings of loss, and I get in my emotions and I'm trying to do better. But for me, the first thing was acknowledge my feelings. I had to kind of sit in the moment. And then because I have a strong family support, communication was one of the strategies I used. And then from there, I needed to problem solve. I just needed to figure out how I was going to move from the point where I was. And so those are the top few things that I used. And then, of course, taking action, and then coupled with a few of the other blocks. So, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah. So and what I also always like about this exercise is that, look, you all already have a lot of resources that you can tap into. And I think, you know, sometimes it is really easy to lose hope, or it's challenging to maintain hope when difficult situations take place. But being reminded of, you know, the tools and the resources that you already have, you know, is hopefully also going to remind you, you know, of your own capacity in that sense. Yeah, thank you. Any other questions or thoughts before we move on? Okay. So I mentioned, you know, the kind of the life stories that help us build resilience. So here's kind of a do you know scale. So this is the question, you know, do you know some of the knowledge of your family's heritage and history? Right? So think about what you can do to further build that resilience that we talk about, right? Can you fill in some of the gaps? How are you sharing the stories with your children, and so that they can remember and maintain, you know, those family legacies? And then also family stories are often told by mothers or grandmothers at family gatherings, you know, so really spending some purposeful time like that. But I also want to invite the fathers and the grandfathers and, you know, the uncles, of course, and aunties and whoever to chip in. But, you know, with some holidays around the corner, as you are getting together, whether it's in person or virtually, you know, think about some of these stories that you can share with one another to strengthen that. And then because really these stories will be so valuable for your children, especially at this time. And you can even future project and ask your children or the children in your life, hey, how do you think you are going to talk about the year 2020, right? I mean, there are so many memes about it, but ask them, what are the stories, what are the lessons they're learning that they're going to teach their grandchildren one day, right? So asking these questions really helps also give perspective to the situation. Okay, and then something like what are some secret recipes in your family for resilience, right? You all shared what your or I think someone shared earlier about what my mother always said to me. So here's one of those things. Okay, we did this. So what I want to say is that also not always all the bad things are just bad. So what I'm going to do is I will share my video with you and tell me if you cannot hear it. Can you hear it?
I don't have sound.
Okay, I figured.
It's coming out now.
It's coming up?
Yeah.
The sound? Okay, hold on. Let me see. How can I... Oh, I know what I have to do, I think. Sorry, just give me one moment. Okay, so what do you take from this?
Can I say something?
Yeah.
I really enjoyed that. As short as it was a powerful message. And for that, at the end, that stuck out for me is that it's so important for each of us. Well, again, because I'm coming from a school perspective and on the secondary level, that there be identified people that can say, hey, I see the good in you. You're not all bad. The things that you already have inside of you, maybe you just did not have an idea of what it was, or maybe you didn't have a name to call it. But I'm here to let you know we're going to walk through this thing together. And you, as it said, you bring joy. So I really like that. And I want to see if I can get it from you to use at school.
Yeah, I will. So I have to tell you, I have tried to find that video on YouTube.
Mhm.
That exact video I have not been successful
Okay.
to finding it, but there are similar videos to this one. So
Okay.
unfortunately, this is embedded, and because it's connected to the National Alliance of Children's Trust and Prevention Funds, I
Gotcha.
cannot send that link. But you can look for the crack pot on YouTube and you might be able to see a similar story.
Thank you. I sure will do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was touching. You know, it's all about diversity and inclusion, right? Everyone's a little different, and everyone has something to add, right? And that's the part we have to keep in mind.
Yeah. Yeah. With all our flaws. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's really lovely. Thank you. So I appreciate your thoughts about this. And so, yeah, so when we recognize, you know, that our flaws water some beautiful seeds, you know, for maybe someone else or in places where we don't see it, that too really helps us to build that resilience and to know that, you know, it's not about perfection, it's about connection, right? So how do we do that? Okay, so another part, and I think this is coming right away. Yeah, so here I have another fun video. Hopefully there's something to laugh, but I want to kind of preempt this. You know, we talk about supporting each other in certain situations. And one of the things when, you know, we look at the resilience building blocks, you know, we are, you know, we have the problem solving is a block. And yes, we need that a lot of times. And sometimes when certain situations just cannot be fixed, right? So we are oftentimes in this moment where when we hear somebody, or let's say we hear our children talk about a difficult experience they had, we as the parents, we want to fix it for them, right? But so I'm going to show you this video here and let's see what you think about this.
It's just, there's all this pressure, you know? And sometimes it feels like it's right up on me and I can just feel it, like literally feel it in my head, and it's relentless. And I don't know if it's going to stop. I mean, that's the thing that scares me the most, is that I don't know if it's ever going to stop.
Yeah. Well, you do have a nail in your head.
It is not about the nail.
Are you sure? Because, I mean, I'll bet if we got that out of there.
Stop trying to fix it.
No, I'm not trying to fix it. I'm just pointing out that maybe the nail is causing.
You always do this. You always try to fix things when what I really need is for you to just listen.
See, I don't think that is what you need. I think what you need is to get the nail
See, you're
out.
not even listening now.
Okay, fine. I will listen. Fine.
It's just, sometimes it's like there's this achy, I don't know what it is. And I'm not sleeping very well at all. And all my sweaters are snagged. I mean, all of them.
That sounds really hard.
It is. Thank you. Ow!
Oh, come on. If you would just.
Don't.
Try to see things my way. Do I have to keep on talking till I can go on? We can work it out. We can work it out.
Yeah. So it's not about the nail, right? Exactly. So, and really, I mean, this is part of what we, you know, when we talk about really complicated situations, you know, sometimes we really just need to be heard. Yeah. Any other thoughts on this before I move on? Okay.
Yeah, I had a thought.
Ah,
To flip the coin, I also think sometimes people become comfortable in their dysfunction. They can't see it. Because that's just how they've learned to live their life, and that's their view of things. So yeah, I recognize that I'm walking around with mud on the bottom of my foot, but it's okay because that's how I've lived, you know, even though I'm putting on a designer pair of shoes, but there's still mud on my foot.
Sure. And it looked like Teresa agreed with you. Absolutely. I mean, there are totally, and sometimes we can enable, right? And we're not talking about enabling here in those situations. It's really more about the support we're showing for each other, and recognizing that sometimes, even if in our world it's about one thing and we can't see it, it's good to be heard. But yes, absolutely. So it's, there are also always different sides to the story. So yeah. Okay.
It's
Sorry.
just, there's all this
How do I do this now? Here we go. Okay, I clicked in the wrong place. Okay, so let's talk about social and emotional competency for a moment, just because that's kind of what I want to, emphasize in our last few minutes here. So, so 0 to 3, which is an organization that provides really awesome materials, education, resources, and programming for children 0 to 3. But they define social and emotional competence as the developing capacity to experience and regulate emotions from secure relationships and explore and learn, all in the context of the child's family, community, and cultural background. So I'll explain. So going back to the brain, right? So what the child is learning in those years, or what social and emotional competency really means, is being able to basically utilize our ability to self-regulate. So when the emotions get really big, think about a toddler. Oh my God. Can you now realize or understand why the toddler turns out to be have a temper tantrum? It's a chemical reaction. The feelings got so intense that the survival part of the brain got completely triggered and is now taking over because, bloody murder, you took my toy, So it's really, this is an essential thing. So the feelings got so big. And so in this process, and this is why it also makes sense that it really takes until the age of 25 or 30 to fully develop our brain. In this whole process, what we need to learn, and this is the social and emotional capacity, is to self-regulate, right? Is to bring our brains back online, is to reduce the intensity of our emotions so we can bring our back online and reflect on what happens. And the place we do this from is having secure relationships. If you have a relationship with an adult, let's be it a caregiver or a parent or even, any teacher or whatever, and they don't make you feel safe, then your feelings is always, you're basically we call it the hypervigilance, or, trying to figure out, am I in danger or not, is constantly slightly alerted. So that means, your brain is never really able to fully come back online. And so therefore it becomes more difficult to actually learn and explore things, because if you don't feel secure in your environment, in your relationships, in your community, in the cultural background that you're in, right? If you don't feel secure, you're not able to really come to that point. Which is also why we talk about that it's so important that children see themselves reflected in the world around them. Whether it's their, ethnicity, or it's their ability, or it's, whatever it might be, it's their gender. We want children to be surrounded with resources that reflect who they are. So, and in a world where they can see themselves fit in. And we can create this. So this allows us to develop that social and emotional competency. So going back to the stories, right? Thinking about how can we reinforce these stories in our families and for our children, where they see themselves reflected in the world. Where they know, I'm not the only one. I'm not the odd one out. I'm not the one who, doesn't fit in because of my hair or, the way I talk or whatever. They can see themselves. And so normalizing that is basically the process that we want to help our children with. Then they can develop this social and emotional competency. And one of the big factors that really plays into this is also having empathy. So again, we're not talking necessarily about empathy in a situation where we're enabling, but in a situation where we really want to normalize and recognize in that situation. So I am going to show you, we're not going to talk about this for a moment. So just as this picture here. So, as you can see, so the more positive relationships and supportive environments children have, the more social, emotional teaching strategies are there. And then, intensive individualized interventions, if that is needed, the more children will be able to really develop these skills. So, when you have a child, I remember somebody mentioned child with ADHD, so understanding, for example, what intervention might be required for that specific child. Are there more limits needed? Reducing sensory stimulation in the house or in the room. I can tell you about this. I have a child myself like that, right? So there's, understanding like what are the stimulating factors and how much do I need to basically put, when we teach our little ones bowling, we put up the bumpers, right? So where do I have to put up bumpers for my child as an intervention so that they can be safe and connected, so they can develop this capacity, which may take them longer because they have a different mechanism that triggers them. And then as the parent, what can you do so that you also maintain your own ability to reduce your, to bring your brain back online and reduce your stress, and we talked about some of these things. So when you go for a walk or you exercise or you meditate or you look at funny videos, whatever that might be, you don't only do that for yourself, you actually do it for your children too. So it's okay to prioritize that, to make sure you have that, and then you can be more present for your children. And the more you model that to them, the more you show them that this is what you're doing for yourself, the more you're also teaching them what they can do for themselves. Okay, any questions? Okay. Right, so now let's talk about empathy for a moment, because that's really the key oftentimes. And this means self-empathy and empathy for our children. And let's listen to this, and then we can have a little discussion about empathy.
So what is empathy, and why is it very different than sympathy? Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, you climb down. I know what it's like down here, and you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, no, you want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with "at least." And we do it all the time because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So I had a miscarriage. Oh, at least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, I don't even know what to say right now. I'm just so glad you told me. Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
Okay, so I'm curious about your thoughts here. What do you take from this?
I mean, I've seen a lot of those actions happening with me, you know, when talking with friends or even family members. And I try to put myself on their shoes and trying to looking at my own feelings and see, yeah, I get it, you know. And I totally got the video on that.
Yeah, I think we're victims of doing that in an effort to try to be helpful. We end up probably making it worse.
Yeah.
I feel like I've seen this before. I think I might have seen it in another training. It's just watching that and watching all those things voiced brings up a feeling. I literally had someone say to me, at least you know you can get pregnant. And I mean, it's like when I get to that point in the video, I like feel that again because it's so true, you know? And I think that truly experiencing, you know, loss or a grief of any kind, you sort of have to hear all the really bad responses experience that say these things to you, you're like, oh my gosh, I'm never going to say that to someone, you know? And you go through the rest of your life remembering that and remembering like all the things that didn't work and you know not to do them, but I don't know how else you would know unless, you know, so it's interesting to see it given that succinctly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, absolutely. And so that's really kind of what, you know, when we're talking about how we can help our children develop their social and emotional capacity is really, first of all, you know, you help name the feelings in that process and you're not trying to explain them or give them a lecture or tell them they should feel something different. And then you tame the feeling, right? So you know, take my son this morning who, you know, I forgot the Halloween costume or didn't know about the Halloween costume rather. And, you know, I could have told him all kinds of things and believe me, they were in the back of my mind, right? Or even on the tip of my tongue. But so saying, oh man, buddy, that sucks. I get it. I mean, that must really feel awful to be the only one who didn't have a Halloween costume on, right? And so he's like, go away. I don't want to talk about it. I'm like, oh, it sucks. You know, and so you just keep on showing that, you know, just I'm not here to fix the situation, can't do it. You know, we're not here to make up for it or, you know, whatever, explain things or lecture. And so eventually he can have these feelings and you validate them, you make room for them, the brain comes back online, and then you can problem solve and talk about what other things can we do that are fun, that give us a feeling of Halloween, right? So, and the same thing with so many other situations. How can we really kind of, you know, tap into the problem solving after we get through recognizing the emotions and having our brains back online. Okay, so I think my slideshow is pretty much almost to the end. Where time flies. I just wanted to, say, so ultimately, what we see, here we go, is that, when we create this kind of a nurturing and supporting and environment, and our children's, we support our children's social and emotional competencies, then, what we're doing is we're not stopping from adversities from happening, right? Because we can't. Bad things will happen in life, but the fact is that we give them some kind of a buffer, right? So we give them that buffer so the stress that we are experiencing doesn't get to them as much. And that's really what building a resilient family is about, right? So how can we do that in a way? And that doesn't mean we have to get things perfect, right? But it's really, how are we able to support their social and emotional competence, because that's the key that will help them develop this. So just so you here have my email address and my phone number if you want to get in touch. This is how you can reach us. And yeah, so I am curious, what are you taking home from this? How are you?
Well, I think we are taking some tools that we can use with our kids, especially this one here.
You gotta understand, they're chasing the, the little laser for cats. That's what they're doing upstairs. That's how I'm getting them to bed tonight.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you. Yeah.
But I mean, it gives some tools to work out, I think that's interesting to see that other people also have the same issues, and
Yeah, you're not alone.
yeah.
Yeah. Awesome.
It gave me a refresher, because as a person that works in the school that gives, it's good to be poured into. So that's what I take away from this training. And I'm going to look for those videos, because I could certainly use them in school. I wish more people were here to hear this information. I really, really enjoyed it, and the participation from everyone.
Wonderful.
Mhm.
Yeah, we do have other programs coming up. So, our program, of course, also had to pivot, the famous word for this pandemic. Have some programs. I want to tell you about a conference that is going to be in December. So I guess you will be on our mailing list or email list. I'm not sure. But there's a conference where we talk about social and emotional development as well. And we have a fabulous speaker who is very inspiring and also the epitome of resilience. And she will also talk about tools that can be used in the classroom as well as for parents at home, and all that kind of stuff. So that's December 8 and 9. It's a conference.
Okay.
Any other thoughts?
By the way, that empathy and sympathy, we use that a lot in the military. Absolutely love that video. Thank you for sharing that.
Awesome. And that's you can find that on YouTube.
Ooh, YouTube.
YouTube. She knows YouTube.
Thank you.
You too. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah, wonderful. Have a good evening, everyone.
Good night,
Bye-bye.
everyone.
Kannst du noch ein bisschen Deutsch sprechen, oder hast
Auch
du
ein
schon
kleines
vergessen?
bisschen.
Ein kleines bisschen kannst du noch, okay.